Well now, hey, the band is sounding better than ever. That's Del Webb and the Webinars, folks, playing our theme song. Hello there, friends, and welcome to today's Grower Talks webinar. I'm Chris Beatties of Grower Talks and Green Profit magazines and the e-newsletter Acres Online, and I'm going to be your host for the next hour or so as we discuss improving nursery weed control with better herbicide rotations. Weeds, I tell you the one thing other than pests that you can count on always having to battle at your nursery or greenhouse is weeds. However, while you may not be able to get rid of weeds entirely, you can minimize them, and you can minimize the amount of labor and the chemicals required to keep them at bay. Of course, as we long ago established, I am never the expert on these topics, but thankfully I know who the experts are, and in this case, I've got two of them. And both of them happen to be based in my home state of Florida. Expert number one is a newcomer to these Grower Talks webinars. He is Dr. Chris Marble, Assistant Professor at the Mid-Florida Research and Education Center in Apopka. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, you were broadcasting from Apopka, from your office at the Mid-Florida Research and Education Center, correct?
That is correct.
All right, I got two quick questions for you. Are there actually weeds in Florida nurseries? Is Florida the place to do weed research?
It is an excellent place to do weed research.
I can vouch for that, folks, having had a nursery. I don't have the nursery anymore. I bet the weeds are still there, though. I can pretty much guarantee that. And question number two for you, Chris. Is Apopka still the indoor foliage plant capital of the world, in your opinion?
It is. It's still the indoor foliage capital of the world. So
there you go. So a lot of houses. There you go. All right, my second guest expert number two, is no stranger to these webinars. We've done several together. As a matter of fact, he is Dr. Aaron Palmateer, formerly with the University of Florida and now Senior Technical Services Representative with Bayer, who just happens to be today's sponsor. Welcome, Aaron.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Good to be here.
All right, and you two are broadcasting from Florida, just a bit further south than Chris is. Where are you at?
That's correct. I'm down in actually in the Redland area, just a little west of Homestead, Florida City area, way south.
There you go. You drive down there Chrome Avenue, and it's nothing but nurseries and weeds. Although most guys do a pretty good job keeping them out. So, how's the weather down there today?
It's pretty hot and humid. It's about 88 degrees. And, you can wear the air on your shirt.
Well, there you go. I really like to hear the weather report when I'm doing a broadcast up here in Chicago in January. That's when 88 sounds really good. And by the way, yes, you know me, Chris Beatties, editor of all that stuff. And I am working the control panel from high atop the Ball Publishing Studios near Chicago. Now, quick bit of housekeeping. Excuse me, everybody. First off, if you have questions, there's a little question area off to the side of your screen, and you can type them in there if they are pertinent to the topic at hand. I'll kind of get to it as quickly as I can. If it's a little bit off topic, I'll save it to when Chris is finished, or the very end we have a Q&A session opportunity there. So we'll work very hard to get to your questions. If you want to listen to this webinar again, or if you want to share it with your colleagues, you can do that at the same place you signed up, conveniently enough, growertalks.com/webinars. And I do want to give a good shout out to Bayer, our sponsor for today's webinar. Bayer puts the free in free webinar. So thanks to them for allowing this to happen. And I believe that's all the housekeeping. So with that said, Chris, why don't you take it away and tell us how to improve our nursery weed control?
Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you again for having me today. So we're going to be talking about improving nursery weed control with better herbicide rotations, and also looking at other ways that we can improve weed control and reduce costs. We're going to start with the priority. So regardless of your herbicide program or what herbicide you're using, you've got to make sure that a couple things are really on point, because if they're not, you're never going to get the control out of the herbicides that you really could. But number one is sanitation. So when you're talking about nursery weed control, sanitation is key. Bark piles, non-crop areas, pots, in the propagation houses, keeping all those areas weed-free is really going to set you up for success later on in the production cycle. I'm also going to talk about the importance of frequent hand weeding and how hand weeding more frequently can really reduce the amount of overall time and money that's spent hand weeding. So I'll show you some results from some interesting research that I was able to participate in. We'll just talk about overall prevention in terms of sanitation. I'm also going to briefly cover some non-chemical strategies. A lot of times people have very sensitive plants. Hydrangeas is kind of the poster child for that it seems to be sensitive to just about every pre-emergence herbicide that we have. Down in Florida, we have a lot of tropical plants and things like that aren't on any herbicide label. So we're going to talk about some non-chemical strategies and how to use those to control weeds when you can't use herbicides. And then finally, I'm going to end with the proper use of herbicides and talk a lot about herbicide selection and how to develop a rotation. Because when you're looking at a herbicide program, you really need to be able to fit those into different times of the year to pick up the species that you want to control. So that's what we're going to talk about, and talk about developing a rotation for your own nursery. I'll give you some tools to be able to do that. So first, we're going to talk about sanitation, and knowing where the weeds are coming up in the pots, especially soon after potting, can kind of give you a clue in some cases where the problem is coming from. You see that picture on the far left of your screen, some bittercrest coming up right by the base of that plant. And oftentimes when you have weeds that are coming up right by the base of that plant, that's indicating an issue possibly in the liners, or you had weed species that were germinating and growing in the liners during propagation. Propagation is probably the most difficult place that we have on a nursery to control weeds, just because we have very limited options there. But if you have weedy liners and things and the weeds are already starting to germinate, our herbicides aren't going to be effective on those. Weeds that are coming up in the middle of the substrate, oftentimes the pine bark is pretty clean most of the time when you get that in. But as it's stored, weeds can be blown or splashed in, and then after the pots are filled, if it's coming up in the middle of the containers, a lot of times that's from weeds that are just blown into those pots. And then if you have weeds coming up around the edges of the containers pretty consistently, that could be an indication that the weed seed are stuck to those pots, and you possibly need to look at sanitizing those pots for if you're reusing your pots quite a bit. So we'll look at all these different issues and then how to kind of come up with some solutions. So weedy liners, some things to look for in propagation that can be issues. Liverwort, it can also often be an issue, and it can really spread very quickly. A propagation environment is perfect for liverwort to really come in and take over. Oxalis and bittercrest are some other ones that we often see in propagation, and those have self-dehiscent spreading seed, and so those can really become problems very quickly. Really, especially when you're talking about rooting in cuttings and things, we really don't have any options, especially when those cuttings haven't rooted in really well. So we really want to focus on the floors and the non-production areas of those houses to keep the weeds clean in there. So some potential options there would be, we have some post-emergence herbicides that we can use in completely covered spaces. A lot of our contact herbicides, such as dicot products, scythe, finale is another one that you can use actually in the house while the crops are there. It can be used in the crop, but it can be used in the house on the floors. And then for pre-emergence herbicides, Morengo could possibly be an option on those floors to keep those weeds free and really reduce the number of post-emergence applications that you're going to have to make to control those. And bark piles, especially bark piles that have been sitting around for a long time, if bark comes in and it's stored for an extended period, possibly you see up at that top picture where some pots have been filled. Maybe they didn't get, the plants didn't get potted up for a while, and those pots sit out for an extended period of time. Oftentimes we see things like groundsel, horseweed. Probably down in Florida in the more southern nurseries, we can see things like thickhead and those have wind dispersed seed. And so those seed can blow in from long distances, especially when those bark piles are exposed for an extended period of time. And oftentimes we see those weeds coming in there. Weedy pots, if you look at this pot, this is just a pot to show you. If you look real closely at that photo, you might be able to see thousands of bittercrest seeds. And those seeds can really stick to the edges of those containers. And even after you remove the media and kind of clean out those pots, those seeds are pretty hard to dislodge there. Oxalis is another one that has very sticky seed, and they can really stick to the sides of the container. So if you're reusing containers, it is important to clean those. Steam sterilization, using pressurized water, things like that can really reduce the amount of problems later on in production. So some solutions, just to go back over those bark piles. It's always best to store on concrete if possible. Use pots soon after filling, because as long as those pots sit out before you apply your pre-emergence herbicide to those, more chances for weeds to be introduced in there. Also, we see a lot of issues when people try to recycle media. That can be used in some cases, but just know that you're probably going to have a lot more weed issues in that case. Pots, steam sterilization. James Altland, actually, USDA ARS scientist, has a really good article on some of the work that he's done steam sterilizing pots. Pressurized water, just out of a hose with a pressurized nozzle, can really dislodge a lot of those seeds as well. And propagation areas, I talked about that a little bit, using Morengo, or possibly Finale or other post-emergence herbicides on the floors. Broadstar, the granular, it can be used in rooted liners in some cases, depending upon the pot size. So we do have some limited options there. And then it is important, just in terms of sanitation, probably the most important thing to set you up for success is just hand weeding more frequently overall. And now I'm going to go into a project that I was able to take part of back in 2016, 2017. And this was a project led by Dr. Joe Neal and Jeff Durr. And this was funded through the Southern IPM Center. And I did this trial. We had it at several different states in North Carolina, Virginia, and then also down in Florida. I'm going to share with you the results that we got down in Florida. And basically what we wanted to look at was the cost difference and the weed difference between weeding every 2 weeks, weeding more frequently, versus what the standard grower practice is in a lot of cases of you put the herbicide out, you don't do anything until about 8 weeks or when you're ready to reapply that herbicide. Then you go in and clean the pots and reapply that herbicide. So that's basically the two things that we looked at. One would be scouting every 2 weeks, weeding every 2 weeks, versus putting the herbicide down, waiting until 8 weeks, then weeding the pots, and then putting the herbicide back down. So we did this in Florida for 24 weeks, and we reapplied the herbicides every 8 weeks. We had 2 blocks of plants, so half of those were weeded every 2, half every 8 weeks. And here's just some difference. So this is week 16 into the trial, and you see the major difference there between the 2 week interval and the 8 week interval. And it's pretty common sense. You say, well, if you're weeding every 2 weeks, of course those pots are going to be cleaner as opposed to weeding every 8 weeks. But really where the magic kind of comes in is when you look at the overall hand weeding time and the hand weeding cost. But this picture right here just gives you an example of how those different weeding intervals really looked at the nursery. At the 8 week interval, we had a lot of spurge and purslane and some other weeds that came in there. And both blocks were treated with herbicides as well. There's just a picture of, this is one of the weeding events, 8 week interval versus the 2 week interval. And those are about 25 gallon terracotta pots there that we use to collect the weeds. The 8 week interval, there's that same pot, but you just can't see it because we had, basically we filled up the whole pot, and it took about 3 of those pots to put all the weeds from the 8 week interval in there. But here's the combined results. So this is in Florida. So over a 24-week period, we had about a 70% reduction in weed weight, total weed weight, by weeding every 2 weeks. This is the cumulative now. And then 65% reduction in weeding cost. So when we weeded every 2 weeks, or the growers weeded every 2 weeks, that reduced their weeding costs by a combined 65%. And the reason for that is because those weeds were never able to go to seed within a 2-week time frame. Even if we went in and they went in and they weeded and they didn't get quite all the weeds, they were able to come back before those weeds ever produced seed. A lot of those species that are really problematic take 4 to 6 weeks to really produce seed, so that frequent interval is reducing your seed pressure tremendously over time. That also allows the herbicides to just give you a lot longer length of control as well. We have a lot of effective herbicide options, but when the pressure just becomes too great, our herbicides are going to begin to fail. A lot of these species can produce thousands of seed, and you can imagine that those will break down a lot faster when the seed pressure is higher. There's a great publication on this. It's done by Joe Neal, and then one of his students, Barker and Neal. That's a 2016, and the name of that is Frequent Hand Weeding Saves Money, and he covers this a lot more in depth in that publication. But I'd encourage you to check that out, because this is one of the most effective ways to reduce total hand weeding costs. So now I'm going to talk about dealing with hot spots. This is oftentimes when I go out and I'll visit a nursery in Florida. A lot of times, especially with the labor issues and things like that a lot of people are dealing with, there's some parts of the nursery, in a lot of cases, it might be some crops where they don't have a lot of herbicide options, and then for one reason or another, a couple areas just get completely out of control. This happens a lot of times during shipping season when a lot of labor is pulled to load trucks and things like that. But you'll have blocks of plants that are just completely covered in weeds, and then it can be difficult to devise a strategy to get those areas back under control, so that you can have some weed-free production areas going forward. So that's going to be the next thing I talk about. And I think one of the most effective ways that I've seen growers manage this, and then one of the things that I recommend people to do, is to break those areas down into manageable areas. So a lot of times, so this chart right here just shows some different production blocks, and those little yellow explosions there are there to represent weed pressure. So a lot of times people will have a pretty big area that maybe got out of control. Maybe it's several production blocks. A lot of times what people want to do is they want to wait till they get that whole area. Maybe it's several pretty large blocks. Get that whole area cleaned up and weeded before they go in and put that pre-emergence herbicide down. In some cases, that might take 4 or 5 days before that entire area could be cleaned before a pre-herbicide could go down. So that can be effective, but there's some downsides to that. The major one is by the time you finish that area, that first section that you weeded probably already has some weeds that are starting to germinate again. You also probably, chances are that a couple of those weeds were missed. They're able to grow. So when you do eventually get that pre-emergence herbicide down, maybe 5 to 7 days after you actually started weeding that area, that herbicide isn't going to be as effective. And so what I tell people to do, and what a lot of successful growers do, is they will break it into smaller areas. So say in this case, you have a total of 8 blocks there. Maybe in one day they were only able to clean up 3 blocks. Well, instead of waiting to clean up the rest of the other 5 blocks, go ahead and treat those 3 blocks. Then you can basically the idea is to divide that production space into manageable areas, weed, treat, and repeat until you finish that. And then when the sequential application goes down, maybe 8 to 10 weeks later, it can go out to that whole area at one time, because in theory and hopefully that area will be a lot cleaner by the time that sequential application goes down. Another thing for these kind of hot spot areas where those areas kind of got out of control that we can use to our advantage is utilize some of our pre-emergence herbicides that have a little bit of post-emergence activity. So for example, dimethylamine P, and that's the active ingredient in Tower, and then as a component of Freehand, the Granular, that's going to provide some early post-emergence control with Spurge. So Spurge, it's maybe the 2-leaf stage to possibly even the 4-leaf stage and smaller. So this is very small Spurge, cotyledon to 2 to 4-leaf stage. if we get that dimethylamine P application down, we're going to be able to get some early post-emergence control of that spurge. So if it's possibly missed during that hand weeding and things, or things are starting to germinate, we can control those with dimethylamine P. With azoxybin, that's of course the active ingredient in Gallery, also a component of Gemini. Fortress is another one now that has azoxybin in it and Snapshot. But azoxybin is very effective on Bittercrest early post-emergence. So Bittercrest before it's flowering, azoxybin can be an effective option there to control some of that Bittercrest.
Chris, let me jump in with a quick question from one of our attendees before you get too far away from hand weeding. Roy wants to know if hand weeding breaks the chemical barrier that you put down by a pre-merge herbicide.
Yes, so that's a great question, and that's one of the things that often comes up when I recommend this practice, and it does, especially if those weeds are a little bit larger too and have a lot more root mass. But the benefit that you get from reducing that seed pressure far outweighs, possibly breaking the barrier in some of those plants. So you're really going to get an advantage by going ahead and pulling that weed and reducing that inoculum, especially some of those weeds that are problematic in nurseries with the sheer number of seed they produce. The benefit is really going to be by going ahead and pulling that weed as soon as possible.
Right. And you did say pull the weeds. You are pulling them out because you want to get those roots out of there as well, right?
Exactly. Yes. That would be
right. Very good.
Yeah. So just back to the early post work, in Dazaplam, that's a Morengo G. We have seen some early post emergence control, oxalis and Spurge, and then our oxaflora from Price, which are a component of a lot of different pre-emergence herbicides. There's several different weeds in the cotyledon to about the 1 leaf stage that oxaflora from products like OH2, biathlon, route, et cetera, that those can control. So those could potentially be some options. Now, this isn't a really effective option for larger weeds, but for very small weeds, these can be an option and possibly give you a little bit more flexibility if you're a few days late or so on the application. So the take-home message to all of this is just have a systematic approach, hand weeding more frequently, using those pre-emergence herbicides, and then doing that especially the hand weeding on a frequent interval. And that's going to reduce your problem over time and really reduce that seed pressure over time. And that's going to really help to give you some reductions in labor costs, especially for longer term crops or things that are going to be in production for, a year, 18 months, something like that. Reducing that seed pressure is really going to set you up for success later on in that production cycle. So now for some talk about just briefly on some non-chemical methods. Of course, mulch is one of the most common things that we have looked at in terms of weed control. And mulch is really effective. The downside is just the cost and possibly the application. It can be hard to apply a lot of these different mulch materials, but really a lot of different things are effective. Pine bark nuggets, wood chips. In Florida, we have all these hurricanes, and a lot of nurseries, they'll have some trees and stuff that fall down, and those are chipped up, and then that can even be used as mulch. The key is that you want some larger particle materials, some things that just don't hold a lot of moisture, basically. You want it to be as hydrophobic as possible. It'll keep the moisture in the container higher, but it will. You don't want the moisture to actually be in that mulch layer. Of course, a lot of people use rice hulls, and they can be difficult to apply. There are some companies that have come up with some different innovative ways to apply rice hulls. This picture down here on the bottom left is a company, Stilt Pro, that made a rice hull application device that they have. They're based out of Georgia, and they allow me to use some of their photos. But rice hulls are an effective method of control, and they can work to reduce weeds really by blocking out the light for the seeds that are already on the soil. And then also rice hulls don't hold a lot of moisture, so they don't make it a very inducive place for weed seeds to germinate. So some keys to mulch success. about a 1/4 inch or so for rice hulls, and then for wood particles or pine bark, you want at least a 1/2 inch, but really 1 inch or greater with those wood-derived materials. You want something that drains quickly, and then those larger particles like a pine bark mini nugget, something like that. Rice hulls work pretty well. So that will be the keys to the mulch success. But they're not going to fit in everybody's production system because they do have a added cost there, especially when you're comparing them to pre-emergence herbicides. But they can be used in herbicide-sensitive plants, hydrangeas, in Florida, stuff like agave, things that people don't really want to hand weed. Slow crops or longer-term crops, those larger containers, that you have more opportunity to recoup your costs by using them in those larger containers, those plants that are going to be in production for an extended period of time. And then one mulch application is going to almost always be one pre-emergence application. And they can be used in combination with pre-emergence herbicides as well. So that would just be something to consider if you really need something to control weeds in those areas. And now I'm just going to talk real briefly about some kind of more experimental stuff that we're looking at, and that's fertilizer placement. So this is something that was looked at maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, and we've kind of picked it back up because a lot of growers in Florida subdress their fertilizer and have example of the different placements that we looked at. Of course, top dress and incorporation are probably the most commonly used methods to add fertilizer. Dibbling kind of fell out of favor because it can cause a lot of phytotoxicity to some plants, all that fertilizer being directly in contact with those plant roots. But subdressing could potentially give us the advantage of improving the weed control because the weeds actually don't have access to those nutrients, and then also possibly not cause the same phytotoxicity issues as dibbling. So that's one thing that we looked at. This is looking at fertilizer placement and weed biomass. So we looked at ecliptic, crabgrass, and spurge. And then these bars here, that just shows the weed growth in grams. Of course, the weeds grew the most in the incorporation and top dress, kind of the standard methods. But if you look at this gray bar, that's the subdress. In a lot of cases, we had weed growth in the subdress treatment that was similar to the weed growth in plots that contained no fertilizer whatsoever. So we had about a 90% reduction in weed growth when we subdressed the fertilizer compared to when the fertilizer was incorporated or top dressed. But the subdressing, it does need, for certain species, you do need to get it down to about a 2-inch depth. And I'll show you on the next slide kind of what that looks like. This slide shows you with that red bar when it's subdressed at a 1/2 inch to 1 inch. Really, there wasn't that much of a benefit there. Those roots were able, and the weed seeds were able to germinate and grow and reach that fertilizer layer. But when you get it down to about 2.5 or 3 inches, here's kind of an example of what's happening there. So in this pot, this is a 1 gallon container pot. It had a ligustrum growing in there, and those big, thick, kind of darkish tan roots there are the ligustrum roots. And so that was a 2-inch liner that was able to root out, get roots down there to that fertilizer layer that you see kind of there on the bottom of the screen next to the thumb there. But then you look up at the top of the pot and you see those little thin white roots, and those are hundreds of eucalyptus seedlings. Those were introduced on top of that pot. Didn't really reduce the germination whatsoever, but those roots weren't able to reach down and get to that fertilizer layer before they eventually died out. This is what it looks like about 4 to 5 weeks after the seeds were introduced on that pot. Those eucalypta never really reached out of that cotyledon to maybe true leaf stage. Some of them did eventually in some of the treatments, but this is a good example of what that looks like. And you can see that they're also pretty chlorotic as well. They're that pale green color. So subdressing effects on crop growth. People have looked at that in previous research. They've seen no difference or increased growth subdressing compared to top dressing or incorporation, about 40 species. We found in our research that you need about 2 inches or so subdress to a depth of 2 inches to really reduce the growth of some weed species. But we need to look at this more, and so we are doing some more research on this, and hopefully we'll have some recommendations coming soon.
Chris, do you have anybody doing that in a production setting yet? And if so, how do you apply the fertilizer at that level?
Yes, there are there's some nurseries that are doing that, and basically the ones that have done it, basically they had some mechanization in place where they were filling pots on a production line with two different hoppers. One of the hoppers would fill the pot about halfway. Someone would add the fertilizer in. Then it would move on down the conveyor belt. Someone would pop the liner in, and then the other potting mix would go on top of that, and then the liner would go into the pot there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that's interesting research. I may have to get that into the next Grower Talks.
And sure. And the next so next I'm going to talk about is pre-emergence herbicides, and that's what I'm going to spend most of the time here on. But regardless of whatever herbicide you're choosing and whatever rotation you're using, your top priority has to be calibration and getting that herbicide down effectively. This is just some looking at some different nurseries and actually the actual rates that they were applying to a block of plants. So it can be very difficult, especially with granular herbicides, to get those herbicides out, at the correct rate. So in this case, that green line represents 200 pound per acre rate. That was a target in these cases, and really people were applying anywhere between a quarter to a little over 2 to 3 times the amount of herbicide that they were trying to apply. And that happens for a couple of reasons, but I would just recommend that if anyone is struggling with particular wheat species, before looking at that herbicide and the efficacy, which is an important part of all this, but to also focus on calibration first, because that's really the key to make any herbicide work for you. Next, I'm going to talk about the pre-emergence herbicides that we have. So hopefully this slide is showing up for everyone and you can kind of see it. Basically, this just gives a list of all the different pre-emergence herbicides that we have to choose from, and they're color-coded by the mode of action, and that's the Weed Science Society of America herbicide group. So you look on there and you see a lot of yellow and a lot of orange. That's our yellow herbicides, or our group 3s, which are mostly our dinitroaniline inhibiting herbicides, and then our yellows are our PPO inhibiting herbicides. But that's a lot of what we have to choose from, and those are a lot of where the research has been on those two modes of action. But this is just an idea, just to give you an idea of all the different options that we have, and to kind of put the point across that we are limited in terms of developing a rotation, in terms of really rotating those modes of action up. But there are ways to do that, and there are ways to get effective control throughout the entire year. So here's it just broken down by looking at sprayable herbicides versus granular herbicides. And these are just broken down with the sprays, the ones that could be used over the top. If we wanted to look at directed, applications, SureGuard and Morengo could be added into those. So with granular herbicides, they can be more difficult to apply in some cases, but we do have a lot more options with granulars than we do with sprayables. So now we're going to talk about just a few different situations in choosing the right herbicide for a specific situation. So I talked about sanitation, and a big part of that is keeping those non-crop areas weed-free. Because if you don't keep those non-crop areas weed-free, your walkways, your aisles, ditches, things like that, those are eventually going to get into the actual crop where they can start to cause some problems. So in a lot of cases, people only want to use post-emergence herbicides in these areas. And maybe they're using things like phenolic or glyphosate and stuff like that. And I've seen places that are making really weekly or bi-weekly applications of post-emergence herbicides to these areas. One thing that I often recommend is possibly incorporating some pre-emergence herbicides. And that could be done as a tank mix, or that could be applied separately. But some good options for these non-crop areas would be something like SureGuard, flumioxazin, Morengo. Both of those would be pretty broad spectrum herbicides and give you pretty long lasting control in those non-crop areas. Control a lot of grassy and broadleaf weed species. Sedges were an issue. Something like tower or pendant magnum could possibly be used. There's a lot of other options that you can use in these cases, but that's going to really reduce the amount of post-emergence herbicide applications that you have to make. And maybe those post-emergence herbicides are a lot cheaper on a per acre basis than some of these pre-herbicides, but the person actually going out and applying those, the labor cost, is a lot more expensive than these pre-emergence herbicides. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now, another situation, we often have weed escapes in containers where maybe someone is using the same herbicide. They've got a herbicide that they like and they're using it over and over again. A lot of times that might be those group 14 plus those group 3 combinations, stuff like OH2, biathlon, route, etc. Those are really good herbicide options. They can be used on a lot of different plants, provide pretty good weed control. But if we only use that type of herbicide with those 2 modes of action, we can miss some species. We can get some things, possibly like a cliptum. We have that as an issue down in Florida, some other things. So in those cases, you probably need to put in something with a different mode of action. So to get away from those 14 plus 3 combinations, some things that could possibly be used will be something like a tower. Freehand would be another option there for a granular option for dimethylamine P. Morengo G and Dazaflam, that's a completely new mode of action. Group 29 herbicide. Gallery, isotopin, that would be another different mode of action to possibly pick up some different broadleaf species. And then Broadstar, that's the same mode of action as the group 14, just like oxyfluorophane, that's in OH2 and biathlon and all those. But Broadstar, the new one is Forte. That's basically a Broadstar plus prodiamine mixture on a granular. But the flumioxazin does have a little bit more broad spectrum control than some of those oxyfluorophane products. So that could be another potential option there to pick up if you're, if you're starting to see some weed species take over. So some sensitive crops, I'll just cover this. Biggest issue, just looking at some crop tolerance. Maybe you're growing a lot of stuff that's not on any herbicide label, maybe some niche type plants. We have this issue a lot down in South Florida where people are growing a lot of tropicals, ornamental grasses, things like that. So in a lot of cases, you might have to test these herbicides out, but some of the softer chemistries that we've seen a lot of good safety with would be things like Regalcade, Barricade, our granular pendimethalin product, Snapshot, that's probably the gold standard in terms of safety. Gallery is another one for broadleaf control. Ronstar G, we found it to be safe on a lot of different tropical plants and things like that. Dimension, that would be an option for ornamental grasses. We've done a lot of work with R4 and seen a lot of good safety with Dimension on ornamental grasses and things. And then Fortress, that's basically a granular, but it's a Gallery plus Dimension mixture, and we've seen a lot of good safety with Fortress as well. So now we're going to talk about actually developing your rotation. I'm going to hopefully give you some tools to actually do this at your nursery. So one thing we want to consider is our annual limitations. Most of our products are going to be limited to maybe 2 or 3 applications per year. And so if we only have 2 or 3 applications per year, we need to find the time when that herbicide is going to give us the most bang for our buck. Effective summer products could be things like Freehand, Tower, Morengo, Broadstar, OH2, possibly Biathlon. I'm going to talk about why those type products could really be used any time of year. And then effective cool season things, some things that are really strong on like Bittercrest and some of our cool season weeds, possibly stuff like Gallery, Snapshot, Gemini, Regal OO, OH2, Biathlon, etc. Different herbicides are going to pick up different weeds each season. All are very variable and they can be altered. So base the choice on what timing and the production schedule is going to work for your specific situation. So now we're going to go into actually how to select a herbicide. So the first thing you want to do for each season, each of your major production seasons, is identify your worst weed. What's the top enemy, your public enemy number one? We've got to find an option that's going to control our worst weed. That's going to be our top priority. Then we also want to identify some secondary weeds that might also be issues. Maybe they're not as problematic as our first, but there's still issues. We want to find active ingredients that are effective for number one, but also have some control on possibly our secondary or our third worst weeds that season. Then we want to pick herbicides and formulations that are going to work for our crops, looking at those labels, and I'll show you some resources to actually be able to look this up pretty quickly, and then consider the seasonality as well. So we'll go through an example here. Example from Florida, a grower's top issue during the summer was spurge. That's a very common issue. Most in a lot of nurseries, spurge being the number one issue during the warm season. Also had issues with Eclipta and several annual grasses, but they weren't as problematic as spurge, but they were still issues during the summer. And then this grower only wanted to use granular options. They weren't really set up to do spray, so we had to find some granular options for them. So we just looked at some efficacy charts. And then these are some of my efficacy charts that I've had from a couple of years, but we do have some efficacy rankings for that were combined across the U.S. that I'll show you at the end where you can get that resource. But in this case, we wanted to find things that provide at least 80% control of all three of those issues, spurge, eclipta, and annual grasses. So we looked at this chart and we looked at our percent control. We saw that Forte, Morengo G, those were our two options where we got about 80% control of all of those three weed species. Broadstar was pretty close there as well, so that could also potentially be an option depending upon the crops that you had there. So those two options, those could be used, possibly during the summertime when spurge and eclipta were issues. This is another case where we're looking for a cool season rotation. In this case, the grower had used Morengo, Freehand, and Broadstar during the summer months. He was trying to control spurge, but also needed to control phyllanthus and artillery weeds. So those three options, Morengo, Freehand, and Broadstar, control those three weeds. But now it's getting into the cooler time of the year, and so Bittercrest, Oxalis, and annual bluegrass or POA are going to be issues during the cool season. So we've kind of already met our limit on Morengo, Freehand, and Broadstar. So we want to look at some different modes of action. We're going to kind of cancel those out. Even if those provided control of these three species, we can't really consider them because we used them during the summer, which was our worst time. That's when we needed our best control. So we look at our options for control of Bittercrest, Oxalis, and annual bluegrass. We have several things that provided very good control of all three of those species. So in this case, some things that were options that he hadn't used before in his rotation: Biathlon, OH2, Gemini, Fortress, Snapshot. Those could all be potential options to control those three species and use during the cooler time of the year. Those would mostly be given a different mode of action. Those could be used in that cooler season rotation. I'm going to briefly discuss some of the results we've got and then kind of what we learned about all these different herbicides and modes of action. These are HRI trials. Horticulture Research Institute sponsors some of this work. We looked at about 25 to 30 different herbicide combinations, sprays and granulars, all at most at the highest label rate. And we looked at about 20 or so different weed species. I'm not going to go through all these, but spurge, crabgrass, parthenium, a lot of things that are important in Florida, but issues that will be weeds that will be issues throughout the country: liverwort, oxalis, bittercrest, marsh parsley, things like that, annual bluegrass. So this is combining so these results, the data was carried out, the trials were carried out over 3 years. And so these are the combined results over all 15 container weed species that we looked at, where we got really good germination and good data. And you can see I'm not going to go through all these, but you can kind of see when you're looking at 15 total species, those products kind of start to even out because all these herbicides kind of have holes where they have weeds that they're not going to control. So it's important to find when those herbicides are most effective and fit those into the rotation. All the herbicides that we have, they're going to be effective on some of your weed species, and then also they have places in terms of safety with your crops and things like that. But we just got to figure out the time when we can get the most bang for our buck with those. So we also compared the different modes of action and the different products by season. In a lot of cases, we have better control in the cool season. That just has to do with the weed spectrum and then also the environmental conditions. Typically, people are going to get better control during the cool season. And this next slide, I'll talk about kind of why that is. Herbicides are generally more effective in the cool season. These trials were conducted outside in Florida, so we did have lower rainfall. Of course, that's going to be different depending upon what part of the country that you're in. But there's going to be less weed pressure generally. Weed spectrum is usually easier to manage. Those cool season weeds are often easier to control with herbicides. And then in other parts of the country, definitely not in Central Florida, but you have freezes and things like that that can kind of give you a boost in control of certain species. We didn't necessarily see this as much in our trials, but growers often report that they have better control with sprays as opposed to granulars, and that's just because I think that a lot of people are able to apply those more accurately. High application volume often helps, going at 50 to 100 gallons per acre with the water volume there. And then irrigating soon after application, washing the herbicide off the plants, getting it watered in as soon as possible can help with safety and things like that. Basically, looking at all those different combinations, we saw a little difference in active ingredients. There were some exceptions, but generally OH2, biathlon, route, those are all those 14+3 combinations with oxyfluorphan plus a DNA type herbicide. We have pretty similar results across the board. Fuerte, which is the flumioxazin plus the prodiamine, it's another 14+3. But we did see better results with it, and that just has to do with flumioxazin having a little bit more broad spectrum than oxyfluorphan in some cases. Pendulum, Barricade, Regalcade, those are all group 3s. Those are all largely similar in this work. Notable exceptions, Tower, we did have broader spectrum than Pendant Magnum. Both of those are group 15, but Pendant Magnum would probably be the preferred option for something like yellow nut sedge. Broadstar G is another group 14. We didn't see the spectrum of control as we did with Broadstar, which is pretty much expected. And then Treflan, we haven't seen as good a control with it in the summertime in Florida as we did with some of those other group 3 type herbicides. But when we combined our results over a lot of different weed species, there really wasn't that much difference in herbicides. But when we looked at specific weed species, there were major differences. And it kind of reveals holes in each herbicide. Every herbicide is going to have some sort of weakness. Gallery is an example where it's excellent on bittercrest and a lot of broadleaf species, but it needs a tank mix partner for grasses because it's just not effective on grasses. Biden's liverwort thickhead, that really reduced the control of a lot of products because there's not very many herbicides that are effective on those weeds. So some possible takeaways, suggestions. Now these are not hard and fast recommendations, but these are just what we saw in our trials and some things that could be effective, some things that are effective on Spurge and things like the warm season weeds, Tower, Freehand, Morengo G, Broadstar, Forte, the flumioxazin type products. Cool season herbicides, the stuff with isoxaben that's strong on bittercrest, Fortress, Gemini, Gallery, Barricade. The stuff that has really large plant labels in terms of safety, stuff like Pendulum, Barricade, Ronstar G, Dimensions 1 for ornamental grasses and things like that. And they can also be used in with some of those other herbicides to kind of expand the control and be used as a tank mix. And then our oxyfluorphan combination products like our OH2, biathlon, route, they perform pretty similarly in both seasons, and those could kind of be used to fill in holes in between some of these other products. So this is just an example rotation. When I meet with growers and I help them develop a rotation, we make one specific to their situation and their crops. But this is just an example of how you could rotate different herbicides and modes of action throughout the year to get pretty good control. So in this case, we have our months, and then we have our top 3 weed species there. And then some different options that could possibly be used. And then in blue there is just the herbicide that, in this particular case, that we chose to go with for a rotation based upon the crops at hand and the weeds we were trying to control. So this is using only granular herbicides. And then when we go to liquid herbicides, a lot of people are switching to liquids just because the chemical cost is less and a lot of people can apply those more accurately. But the major downside to liquids is we don't have the same number of options in terms of over-the-top uses of these liquid herbicides. We just don't have as many. Really, you're limited to things like gallery, barricade, pendulum, tower, possibly dimension, depending upon the crop that you're growing. So we really don't have a lot of options, but this could be a liquid rotation there. Something like a gallery barricade, getting that out earlier in the year when Bittercrest is an issue, getting a tower application down when Spurge is the #1 issue there in the early summer to give you a head start on some Spurge. And then you just go down the list like that and just try to do the best you can with those, only choosing liquid products. With liquids, they're usually fairly limited. Like I've talked about, tower, gallery, Gemini, barricade, pendulum, dimension. I didn't really speak too much of Devernol. That's an older product, but it's still out there, and it could be used for some grassy weed control and stuff like that. But with conifers and certain other things, we do have SureGuard, and then also Morengo could potentially be an option. I'm going to let Aaron talk more about those updates of that Morengo label, but in those certain crops, that would give you two different active ingredients. Morengo would be another mode of action for over-the-top application that could potentially be used. Now, while I'm kind of summing this up, I want to redirect everyone to this pest management guide. So I went over some efficacy charts and some of the results that I've come up with. Those were just done over about 3-year time frame. So we did repeat all those, but this pest management guide, we have a weed management chapter, and that was written by Joe Neal, Jeff Durr, myself, Andy Sinizak. And then those 3 guys have forgotten more than I'll probably ever know about weed management and ornamentals. So I was very fortunate to be able to work on this project with them. But we developed efficacy charts looking at basically our results from years of efficacy data. And we put rankings in there. So just about every weed that we have data on, it's in this guide. If there is a ornamental plant on a herbicide label, it's in this guide. So this guide could really help you to develop a great rotation program. We also have some sample rotations in there. If you just Google 2017 Southeast U.S. Pest Control Guide, that will come up in a Google search. So I would want everybody to check that out. It's a free PDF download, so anyone can have it. And if there's any questions that anyone has and I can ever help them out with anything, best way to reach me is probably my email, and it's marblesc@ufl.edu. And I really appreciate everybody tuning in and y'all having me. And I do have some, hopefully have some time for any questions that have come in.
We did get some questions, Chris, but I want to go ahead and hold off and let Aaron do his section because some of the questions may get answered in there, and then we'll be sure to leave time at the end. We'll get to everybody's questions.
Sure.
So, Aaron, you set to take it away?
Yeah, sure am. And first of all, I just want to thank Dr. Marble. That was an excellent presentation, some really good information. Chris is a tremendous resource for growers in Florida. And I hope people will add him to your contacts because I go to Chris for weed IDs, product performance information, and as you can see, he does a lot of trial work. So really good stuff, Dr. Marble. But one of the things I want to address, and this always comes up, especially when we're talking about weed control, and that is just overall money, cost in use, cost savings. Joe Neal has some stats floating around out there that shows that weed control in the ornamental nursery can exceed $4,000 per acre. And I'll tell you, I've interacted with a number of nursery growers that just give you some pretty atrocious numbers of when it comes to managing weeds particularly. And of course, you've got the herbicides, cultivation barriers like Dr. Marble mentioned with the mulches, and then the ultimate, the hand labor. One of the things when it comes to herbicides and pre-emergence herbicides, you have to consider what goes into every application. You've got site preparation, and whether that's taking care of existing weeds, your application prep, so you're handling, you're mixing the materials. Then, of course, the actual application, and then the cleanup that goes into both, with disposal and equipment for the application. And so every application, there's a lot that goes into that from an expense standpoint. And one of the things, Bear is really excited to address is cost in use. And I encourage people to go to the website. This is es.bayer.us/Morengo-calculator. And what you can do is you can go in and fill this out to look at ultimately cost per month per acre. And what I want to, the take home message here is that, Morengo, a bottle of Morengo or a case of Morengo, that price tag can be pretty, scary. But when you actually look at the value that it brings due to the longevity for managing weeds, controlling weeds, that's where the real beauty comes out. So I encourage people to go and look at that cost and use calculator. And then the other thing that I'm really excited about, because a lot of research and development goes into, labels and also label expansion, label updates. And so we're excited that we've got two new labels for Morengo and Morengo G that have both been federally approved. And I know Morengo G has been approved at all the state levels except for California, and I believe Morengo is coming online soon. But one of the things I just want to point out is that there's been 15 new weeds added to that Morengo control or suppression list. But then also now there's about 270 tolerant plants on the label. So that's pretty impressive. And that includes a lot of palm species. Dr. Marble's done a lot of work with palms in Florida, so we've got about 15 different species of palms on the label. And then also what's really exciting is Chris mentioned the over-the-top applications. And so we've got about a dozen conifers, mainly conifers, on the label for over-the-top applications. So definitely check that out. And the next slide here just shows some of the same theme pertaining to Morengo G. And so with that, I'm gonna let Chris Beatty take it back over.
All right, and I just wanted to make sure anytime that Aaron said Chris and then something complimentary about his weed prowess, he meant Chris Marble, not Chris Beatty's. So just for clarity, we do have a few questions here. Let's dive right into them. Roy wants to know how about pre-merge chemical control in smaller pots, like smaller than a gallon size, even down to the liner size. Chris, what about that?
Yeah. So there's a lot of the labels are going to exclude treating containers. Often it's less than 4 inches in size. There are some things that will let you treat fully rooted liners that are smaller than that. I talked about Broadstar G. That's one of the ones that comes to mind, and I believe that label will let you treat smaller containers if the liners are fully rooted. That's really one of the only ones that I can think of. One of the other things to consider with that is if these plants are in those smaller containers and they're inside, it doesn't really matter because we really don't have any options for on the crops in a fully enclosed house. So that will be something to keep in mind as well. Also, as far as during the propagation process, I'm not going to recommend anyone use any pre-emergence herbicides unless those liners are, about finished and about ready to get stepped up and potted up, because there's not going to be anything that's labeled on those unrooted cuttings. We have found, we've done a lot of work with that, but the major thing is some of those can slow down your rooting time and stuff like that. You want to get those plants out of propagation as soon as possible. Get them potted up. So we just don't have a lot of good options there.
Gotcha. All right. Jose, who is based up here near me, wants to know if there's any herbicides that are effective on Hydrangea macrophylla, which may not be something you deal with much in Florida to understand its sensitivities, but what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so we don't have a lot of Hydrangea macrophylla in Florida, but I have done some work with hydrangeas. So there are a few labeled options. One of them, the dimethylamine P products, so Freehand and Tower. They used to be on those labels. I believe that they still are, but people can still report injury with those. The macrophylla, like I talked about, that is really the poster child for herbicide-sensitive plants, considering how popular it is, how many people grow it, and how sensitive it is to pre-emergence herbicides. A lot of people have gone to mulch in that case, or other non-chemical methods, because there just really isn't a whole lot of great options that you can count on to be safe. Also, there's some differences in terms of cultivar and things like that as well. So that is a big challenge.
Mulch your macrophyllas. Easy to remember because of the
There you go.
there. There you go. Juan is asking, well, a very broad question, just about safe herbicides to use on perennials. Maybe too broad a question.
Right. So yeah, there were those ones that I listed in the presentation. There's some things that you could try. So in terms of labels that have probably the most perennials on there is probably going to be something like Snapshot. That has probably more plants on the label than just about anything else. We've done a lot of work with some more southern type perennials with the Fortress over the past couple of years. That's the newer granular herbicide that's out, and we've seen pretty good safety with it. It'd be similar to Snapshot, but it's got dithiopyr as one of its active ingredients. But then those granular, granular DNA type products, Pendulum, stuff like that. It's just hard to find something that's across the board safe on a lot of those different perennials. But I would say look to those crops. I'd say check out that pest management guide that we have. Andy Sinizak has a whole chapter in there on labeled options for perennial and herbaceous plants. So
good advice. But also be sure to work those rotations so you don't depend too much on one product.
Right.
We've got a couple of liverwort. That's a couple of folks' problem out there.
So pre-emergence or post-emergence or both or?
Anything. They're desperate.
Okay. So pre-emergence control, one of the only things that has liverwort on the label where I've seen consistent results, or at least that I've worked a lot with, is the flumioxazin products. So Broadstar could be an option to prevent it from growing actually in the containers. It works fairly well. There's been some work with Ronstar, those other group 14 type herbicides. So those have some efficacy on it. This is just 1 year data, but we did see some fairly decent control/suppression with Morengo in some of our trials where we were just looking at preventing its establishment from spores and things like that. Post-emergence, there's a lot of your contact products work on it fairly well. There's not a lot of great options that can be used over the top of plants, though.
All right. And let's see. Adam wants to know, other than Morengo, are there any other pre-emergent products you can use inside a greenhouse?
Yeah, there's some that are labeled depending upon how long you want to keep that greenhouse empty for. SureGuard is one that it has it on the label, and you just have to have the house empty, and then it needs to be watered in, and plants can be brought back in 24 hours after that. So that's one that comes to mind. There's a couple others. I just can't think of them off the top of my head, but Morengo is one where it's not going to be volatile, and you can actually use it on the floors and things like that with the crops in the house. It's better to do it when the house is empty, but it does allow you to use those with the crops in there. So.
All right. Another pretty broad question here. Jane is interested in herbicides for her mum field. And I would think the first question is, well, what weeds are you trying to control? Have I learned anything in this webinar, Chris?
Right. That would be the big question that we want to know in terms of what we wanted to target. But again, I don't want to keep deflecting the questions and tell people to check out that guide. But we really do have a pretty good list of options there for mums specifically. There's some all the labeled options for mums are in that pest control guide. So you could check that out and get a list of a few products and then match up, in terms of what weeds you were trying to control there.
Good advice. Okay, let's see. Carl wants to know, will Morengo ever be registered for use in Suffolk County, Long Island? Aaron?
Yeah, well, I
Good
guess,
old New York, right up there in California.
Yeah, I don't have a definitive answer for that, but I can definitely, if he wants to shoot me an email, I can get that answered. But that's a tricky question.
Right, and the answer is not drive to New Jersey and pick some up. That is not the answer. So I did not say that. How about mile a minute vines? What's your best recommendation? I do not know that weed.
I'm
Chris.
trying to think of. I know there's a couple different things that kind of go by that, and the one that I'm thinking of is more of a kind of a mid-Atlantic northern type weed. If it's the same one that I'm thinking of, I can't think of the genus and species name, but I really don't have a good recommendation for you. I've never worked on that myself.
All right. First time we stumped him. First one. Here's a question from Phil. Any work being done on slow release, long lasting granular herbicide, kind of like a slow release fertilizer?
Right. There was some interest, and people have kind of looked at that in the past. I don't know of anyone that's actually looking at that now, but people were looking at basically using some different types of polymers and stuff like that to kind of release them. There's another researcher named Hannah Mathers that was treating mulches, and the mulches were kind of acting as slow release carriers in some of her work. She has several articles in different nursery magazines and stuff like that on there. But yeah, I don't know of anybody that's working on that now.
All right. A project for somebody, maybe. Nick is in an independent garden center setting and wants to use either a pre or post emergent in a large retail tree lot, specifically on root balls, he says. If you're doing B&B and you get the weeds growing on those.
Okay. I probably definitely wouldn't want to use anything systemic. You'd probably want to keep it to those contact action post-emergent herbicides and possibly spot spray. I need to see kind of the situation. That's kind of hard to answer, but definitely wouldn't want to probably go with any type of systemic type herbicide.
Yeah. No Roundup, in other words.
Exactly. Yeah. So you want to stay on the safe side of that, especially when those plants are getting ready to sell and everything. But those contact type herbicides, most of those shouldn't cause a problem. I know people have used those on like the root maker type pots, the air pruning pots, and seen minimal issues with those in some cases. So.
All right. Well, Nick, you'll get his email address again in the next slide, and so hang on, and then you can email him directly, maybe send a few photos or what have you, and see if we can hook you up with something specific. A couple more here, if everybody wants to stay on. I know these guys will go a little bit longer here. Heather wants to know about control of chickweed and foxtail in outdoor daylily production.
Chickweed and foxtail in daylily. So there are quite a number of things that are labeled on daylily. Just the things that are coming to mind that will control both of those. I'm pretty sure it depends on the. I don't know if there's a specific cultivar list that's listed on the snapshot label, but that will be one that could possibly be an option. Label for use on daylilies. We've seen a lot of safety with a lot of products on daylilies, really. Especially, I don't know if they're dormant or actively growing, but that might have an effect on the type of plants that you could use. But snapshot could be an option. Freehand has hemerocallis on the label as well. That's going to pick up both of those plants. I believe you can double check me on that in terms of those labels, but that's two options for you right there. So.
All right. Let's see. Oh, a little clarification from one of our liverwort question askers. He was looking at in aisles and under benches, not in the pots themselves, I think.
Okay, so in aisles and under benches, so a lot of those, so you definitely don't want to use glyphosate. That's not going to have really any impact on it whatsoever. At least in the stuff that I've done, I've seen pretty good control with the fatty acid type products. So stuff like Scythe. Also seen fairly decent control with stuff like Dikewater Reward. SureGuard is one. Where we've seen very good post-emergence control of liverwort. And then also it's that Plumiances, and so it gives you a little bit of, it's going to give you some post-emergence control, but then also it provides that pre-emergence control, and it might be able to help prevent it from coming back. So all those could potentially be options.
All right, got a couple more here with some specific weeds, including one that I'll be curious to see if you've ever heard of this one. but cudweed, that's an easy one. How about cudweed in containers?
Cudweed in containers. I'm guessing it's the like a what is it? The trying to think of the specific cudweed species that I see the most, but yeah, I mean a lot of things are fairly effective on cudweed. Those broad general herbicides I talked about, I think I've seen pretty good control with those, the oxyfluorophane type combination products, freehand, stuff like that. So those would potentially be options.
All right. Bittercrest and Spurge in ferns.
Ooh, okay. So we have some things that will control bittercrest and spurs, but the ferns is where you're getting me. So ferns, that's another one of those real sensitive plants. Probably the herbicide with the most ferns on the label is probably Snapshot. Seems like the ferns are fairly, I mean, they're sensitive to a lot of different products. We've seen pretty good control. I mean, we've seen pretty good safety with a lot of the ferns that we deal with in Florida, specifically like macho fern and stuff like that, with products like Snapshot and Gallery. We did some work with Fortress this past year and saw some injury with that dithiopyr. But Soxaben seems to be a fairly safe product for a lot of the ferns, but I would just check those labels and with the specific fern that you're talking about, and then also do some testing beforehand. But those Soxaben products, they would give you some Spurge control and pretty good bittercrest control, and then they could be used on ferns. But yeah, that's another tough one where you're not going to have a whole heck of a lot of options for your ferns. So.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap up. There's a few more. They keep coming in. We could go on for hours here, I think. I told you, weeds are popular. But let's finish with this one. Maureen wants some guidance for dealing with cyanobacteria.
Oh, yes.
Nostoc algae.
Yes. So we've done some work, and we've seen basically several people, a lot of us have worked on this over the past couple of years, and we just can't get consistent results from year to year. The person who's seen the best results and the most consistent results is, again, Joe Neal. I've talked about him a couple of times, but out of North Carolina State. But he's seen some control with some different products, I believe, some Diuron and some other things. In Florida, we've seen fairly good control with Terracite, but then in other places they've done work and they haven't seen any control with Terracite. There's reports out in Oregon where they saw excellent control with Scythe, and we saw no control with Scythe. But anyway, so it seems to be different based upon the location. But this is a great question because it does highlight. I want to highlight the Hour 4 project. We were just at this meeting last week, and if anyone doesn't know what the Hour 4 project is, basically that's a USDA project. Growers can go onto the Hour 4 website, put in their priority needs, and then our researchers will work on it across the country. We'll get funded and we can do some, basically it's all work for the specialty crop industry, looking at these different uses of pesticides to help make growers have options. And this past year, I think we're going to be able to start working on nostoc at different locations throughout the country because growers put that in to that website. So I would tell people, when you have these sensitive plants, when you have things, when you don't have a lot of herbicide options, put that request into our forum. We will try to do that work for you. So.
All right. Well, and here I thought you were going to get stumped on that one. Not a chance, because he's from the University of Florida. That's why. All right. If we didn't get to your question, if you have more, or if you need some clarification, here's the email addresses of our two experts. Jot them down, or take a screenshot, or just refer back to the webinar, which you will be able to do pretty quickly. Hopefully within the hour. I should have this posted online. You'll see it in our archives, the same spot where you signed up, GrowerTalks.com/webinars. And while I'm mentioning webinars, you mentioned, Chris, a couple of other noted weed specialists, Dr. Joe Neal and Dr. Jeff Durr. I have done webinars with both of those gentlemen. Now I've got the triumvirate of weed experts in my stable. That's pretty exciting. Is there anybody else out there, or is this it? That's pretty cool. You can, if you go back into our archives and do a search, you should be able to find previous herb webinars with both of those guys. I'm sure you'll pick up some excellent information that way. And while you're there, look for some of my past webinars with Aaron as well on other topics besides herbicides. And speaking of Aaron, special thanks to his boss and our sponsor, Bayer, who puts the free webinar. And while you're out at www.growertalks.com/webinars, check out my next webinar, which is going to be Thursday, October 17th. If you're a perennial grower, you will definitely want to tune into this one. It's the A to Z of growing perennials in hydrofiber. That's that hot new wood fiber product that everybody's talking about. And my guest expert is going to be none other than Paul Pollan, a longtime author of our Perennial Pulse e-newsletter. So all that, I think I've covered all that stuff. So let's wrap it up. I want to thank Chris Marble and all of his colleagues at the University of Florida, go Gators, and also Aaron and our good friends at Bayer. And on behalf of all my staff here at Ball Publishing, who work hard so I don't have to, this is Chris Beatty saying, so long, everybody.